Last year, when pretty much the whole world was in lockdown, we saw pictures and read stories about how nature was reclaiming its place, or nature was coming back. What is this nature? Where had it gone that it was coming back? What is our relationship as human beings with this nature? Hello, I'm Radha Gopalan, an environmental scientist and educator. I invite you to explore our relationship with this nature over the next 4 sessions. During the course of this series, I will be using the word environment and not nature when referring to the world around us. A few words about the purpose of this series. Modern human society has distanced itself so much from the environment that sustains it that we're now at a point in our history where we don't really know the real extent to which we have impacted the environment around us and the severity of the impact. Scientists have been telling us for a while now that human activity has become the most important driver of change at a planetary level, and some of these changes are irreversible. It's time for our species to seriously rethink the way we live and relate with our environment. That is the purpose of the series. To get us to think about why we are in this position, about the interconnectedness of life, and what that means for how we respond to changes in our environment. It also urges us to reimagine our life, relationship with other living beings, and our environment in a way that will sustain life. Such an exercise can become abstract and intellectual, but by using real-world experiences and examples, we hope that you'll be able to relate to what we're attempting here. So in our first session, we will look at where we are today, how we relate and think about our environment, and where it has brought us. We will then discuss a framework to see the world a little differently and understand why that is important. Often when people talk about nature, it's about something far away. As a concept too, it's broad and difficult to define. In fact, many scientists argue that this natural world is really long gone because human activity has impacted the entire planet, even where human beings don't exist. When we imagine that nature is over there and far away, we're also not able to relate to the effect we have on it. We sympathize when we hear about damage to plants or animals or water, loss of life, etc. But somehow we're not able to relate to the dangers of it for the present and future. This is also why, in this series, the word environment is used rather than nature. Environment is what is around us. Now, over the last few years, terms like climate change, global warming, ozone hole, water crisis, obesity, malnutrition, and more recently, viruses and the pandemic are becoming a part of our everyday vocabulary. Whether it is school textbooks, newspapers, social media, everywhere, it's everywhere, right? And we relate to them in very different ways. It's happening to someone else, it's out there in the future, it is affluent countries and societies who created this problem. It's the responsibility of governments or scientists to solve it. Oh yeah, and also technology is the only way out. Now, in addressing these issues, the most common approach is to see each of these as a separate problem that needs a solution. Human innovation and creativity and intelligence has made great strides in health, longevity, and it has also revealed to us the wonders of the universe. It has also allowed us to think that we can control any situation. But now we find ourselves in a time in history where there seems to be so many crises: water scarcity, food crises, malnutrition, deep inequality in society, conflict, global warming, climate crisis, loss of biodiversity. I mean, we just seem to be surrounded by crises. So let's try and understand all this with an example. Now, water scarcity is a big problem in most places, in India and the world over. So we see it in water conflicts between states. For example, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu have fought over Kaveri, Kerala and Tamil Nadu have had conflicting situations over Mullaperiyar, and so on and so forth. We also see long water queues in the slums in our cities, water tankers being deployed. But most often, the solution that is sought is either digging more wells, digging deeper wells, building facilities to draw more water from rivers, from lakes, or if you're in a coastal city, desalination of seawater, that is removing the salt from the seawater and making it fresh water. Now, each of these, if you notice, are technological solutions which address the immediate problem, but they also create new problems. You know, tankers are typically used to meet a city's water needs, right? Where do they draw their water from? They draw their water from wells outside the city or from rural areas, which leads to fall in groundwater in those areas. Now, that affects the water availability for people in that area, farmers and other residents, and then their water scarcity will have to be dealt with. And then this continues. Now, if you take desalination, the concentrated saltwater stream from the desalination plant will have to be disposed, which affects coastal ecosystems. It impacts the marine ecosystem and the fisheries which are dependent on it. So, these then have to be addressed. So, every time we find a solution, we seem to be creating another problem. What if we were to look at this a little differently? Try and understand the relationship between water scarcity and why it's happening. Where is the issue most severe? What is the relationship between how water is being used and its availability? We could then map these relationships and, based on this understanding, maybe find ways to address the issue. Communities in very arid parts of India, even in desert communities actually, have done this. You know, they've understood relationships between the condition, why it's happening. Is it because of poor rainfall, or is it because we're not managing our water resources correctly? Or is it that we're using too much water, or the way in which we're using water, right? So together with local planners, experienced local people and water experts, they have built, in fact, even rejuvenated rainwater harvesting structures. And then these structures are used for collection of water and also to sort of recharge the groundwater. Now, in the early 1990s, the city of Chennai did just that. So planners, citizens groups came together and they found a way to address water scarcity through rooftop rainwater harvesting. It was a consultative process between people, water, technology, and land. So understanding relationships allowed us to respond in multiple ways, which collectively address the water scarcity issue. Now, do you see how these are two different ways to respond to challenges and relate with our environment? Yeah? So as we think about water, maybe we can add another connection to our network. How do we get around water, and how do we get water in rivers, lakes, ponds, etc.? It's from precipitation as rainfall, right? The rain falls on the ground, it percolates into the ground, it's made available as groundwater, and many rivers, of course, also get their water from the glacier melt, right? Now, all of this can take a few weeks in some places to a few years. It also depends on the pattern of rainfall, it depends on the local geology. Now, as the Earth's surface temperatures are rising, what is called global warming, we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in our climate. Extreme temperatures, cyclones, typhoons, alternating with droughts, rapid melting of glaciers, which is pushing large volumes of water to the ocean. Now, all this is affecting availability of fresh water on land, in our rivers, and in groundwater. Successive drought years or poor monsoon or excessive floods, all this has a relationship with how much water is available for human use. So do you see how water scarcity in a city is related not only to how it is extracted and used, but it also has a relationship with larger processes that maintain and regulate water in the sources and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So that is the kind of connection that we're talking about. So let's pause at this point and take stock of what we've said so far, right? What are we saying first? We see, generally in life, we seem to categorize conditions or difficult situations around us as problems, and they need to be fixed with solutions. Now, this hasn't worked very well for us, has it? Yeah, because we seem to be creating more and more problems and moving from one crisis to another. Water crisis, climate crisis, food crisis, and so on. The second idea that we talked about a little bit earlier was that changing conditions in the environment, whether it is locally, regionally, globally, they're actually due to shifts and sometimes transformations in processes triggered by human actions. So you cannot see them as discrete events. And here we're talking about, that connection we just made between global warming and water scarcity. Now, for a while now, scientists across the spectrum have been urging us to look at life and earth processes in a more systematic manner and in a more systemic manner. So let's understand what the systemic manner is. So for that, we have to understand what is a system. So what is a system? An interconnected set of elements, right? And they're organized quite coherently, and they're much more than a sum of the individual parts. For example, our body system. It's much more than an aggregate of individual cells. You have cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and the human system. Similarly, an ecosystem, right? It's not just a set of individual animals and plants. It's much more than that. Now, unlike a machine, living systems are complex. They are a network of relationships that change, reorganize, recreate. Think of it like a spider's web, right? That network of relationships. Then there are feedback loops among the various elements. And often it's difficult to find where something begins and another ends. And the behavior is pretty difficult to predict. Now, if we go back to our water example and think a bit systemically, then we find new connections and relationships. For example, one of the factors affecting water availability is also related to what food we grow and where we grow it and how we grow it. So for instance, in water scarce regions, like say the Deccan Plateau, doesn't it make sense to grow more water conserving crops such as millets, which were grown there traditionally, rather than water intensive crops like say wetland paddy, right? Wetland paddy is much better cultivated in areas where there is much more rainfall, for example in Kerala. Right? It also requires consumers to really show a preference or choose less water intensive foods. So consumers like you and me. Now, so this network of relationships, when understood, it allows for responses and changes to be made at multiple points and multiple levels, so that it leads to reduced pressure on water resources, a systemic response where various parts come together to become more than a sum of its parts. Now, a few frameworks have been proposed to take a systemic view of the environment, and you can read more about them using the links that are provided below this video. But for our purposes in this series, we will work with the principles of the systems view of life framework that was developed by scientist, physicist Fritjof Capra and chemist Pierluigi Luisi. The reason I chose to use this is because it embodies the idea of life as a network of relationships. Now here is a slide which sort of depicts to us this systems view approach. It's called the nested systems slide, right? So here if you can see, the individual is actually embedded in the system of the household, which is then embedded in the larger social economic system, and then of course on the ecological system and the larger earth system. So with this understanding, of this nested systems, if we were to look at the issue of water scarcity, then our response would be very different. Scientists, technologists, policymakers, planners, farmers, engineers, pastoralists, you and me, will need to engage and be part of the decision-making process in various ways and in democratic ways. Similarly, the pandemic, it is not just a public health crisis or a public health issue or a problem for medicine to solve. And we've seen that as countries and states have responded to the pandemic, they've had to think about the economic implications. They've had to understand the network of relationships between public health, economics, mental health, education, jobs, etc. Right? So decisions need to emerge from a multidimensional perspective. We will now stop here for this session, but before I sign off, let's see what we can take away from today's discussion. So first and foremost, what did we say? We said by and large, our approach to addressing changes or conditions in life and the environment is to slot them into problems that must be fixed with solutions, right? Then our responses to change have largely been symptomatic. It's almost like you're addressing the symptom of a disease, right, rather than the cause of the disease, and also reactive. They have also been technology-centric rather than seeing technology as part of the solution or response. Now, our solutions, they tend to focus on a single issue. So it shifts the problem to another part of the system. We saw that in the water example, where the lack of water in a city is solved at the cost of water availability for another community. Life is a process and not an event is another thing that we just saw. And growth and development are processes, and that's how we need to look at it. Now, in order to sustain life in all its forms, it requires a new kind of thinking. Thinking in terms of relationships, patterns, connectedness, and context. Life on Earth is a network of relationships which is embodied in the systems view of life framework. And systemic responses do not address or respond to a problem in isolation. Rather, they approach it within the context of other related conditions. Thank you.